What kind of family deliberately leaves someone off the Christmas card list, knowing full well that person had spent decades hosting dinners, baking cookies, and hand-stitching ornaments for their tree? What sort of twisted pride does it take to treat me like a ghost, erasing my name as though I had never mattered? That was the moment I decided, if they were going to pretend I didn't exist, I'd make myself unforgettable by sending a card of my own, one announcing that I had just donated $2 million to their fiercest rival. It hadn't always been like this. In fact, for years I'd been the one they could count on. Christmas Eve dinners at my house, warm cider simmering on the stove, stockings lined along the fireplace with everyone's names even. The newest babies had theirs embroidered before the ink on their birth certificates had dried. When the family decided to send out glossy holiday cards, I smiled and dutifully posed, even when I hated how I looked. Betrayal, when the first cards arrived in the mail of my vedid, I felt a prickling chill spread across my chest. Are you sure it didn't just get lost? My friend Linda asked when I showed her the empty spot on the mantel where it should have been. Lost. Linda, they posted pictures online. Everyone was there. The caption said, "All of us together again." All of us, I repeated, my voice cracking. Except me. She pursed her lips, sympathetic but hesitant. Maybe it was just a mistake, but I knew better. With me family no accidental, you. Subtle exclusions had been brewing for years. Whispered comments about how I wasn't really like them. How I thought too differently. They'd roll their eyes when I donated to causes they didn't support. The truth was, my values made them uncomfortable. They wanted glossy perfection, while I believed in substance, in giving. So, when the sting of exclusion settled into something darker, I began to plot. It was a Tuesday night when the idea crystallized. I was scrolling through a local charity newsletter, one that belonged to the very organization my family's pet cause despised. My cousin William had spent half his life fundraising for the Community Heritage Foundation. But they were bitter rivals with the Urban Renewal Trust, the group I'd quietly admired for years. The trust wanted progress, innovation, new housing for struggling families. The foundation wanted preservation of the old ways, which usually translated to protecting the wealthy from change. What if, I murmured to myself, my absence on their mantle becomes the loudest presence of all? The next morning, I drove straight to the trust's office. It was a humble building downtown, nothing like the foundation's marble-floored lobby. But the moment I walked in, I was greeted with warmth. Good morning. Welcome to the Urban Renewal Trust, a young woman said, rising from behind the desk. I'd like to speak to someone about making a contribution, I told her, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. Minutes later, I sat across from their director, a wiry man, named Michael with kind eyes and ink stains on his fingers from scribbling notes. You're considering supporting us? He asked, cautious but hopeful. Not considering, I said. Deciding. I paused, savoring the moment. $2 million. Michael's pen slipped from his hand. Did you say $2 million? Yes, I replied, calm as ice. I want to make it very clear that I believe in what you're doing. And I want the world to know it. His face lit up in disbelief and gratitude, and as we shook hands, I felt a surge of satisfaction, unlike anything I'd known before. The plan for the Christmas card came to me later that evening. If they thought they could airbrush me out of their glossy family tableau, I would produce my own card, shiny, festive, brimming with joy, and in bold script. It would announce the truth this Christmas. I gave the gift of $2 million to the Urban Renewal Trust. I contacted a designer the next morning. I want something elegant, but powerful, I told him over the phone. Snowflakes, candles, maybe a wreath, but the centerpiece is the message. Big, unmissable. He chuckled. That's unusual. But I can do it. When the proofs arrived, I laughed out loud. It was perfect. Rich crimson borders, gold lettering. A photograph of me holding a glass of champagne in front of a lit fireplace. The caption sparkled across the top like a headline. Season S greetings from me and $2 million to the Urban Renewal Trust. I ordered 500. A week later, the cards went out. Each envelope carefully sealed, each address chosen with meticulous spite. My entire family. Their friends, their allies, every member of the Heritage Foundation Board. I didn't stop there. Copies went to local reporters, community leaders, even the mayor's office. The first phone call came from my sister. "Margaret, what the hell is this?" She shrieked as soon as I picked up. A Christmas card announcing some ridiculous donation. To them, to the Urban Renewal Trust. "Yes," I said, my tone sweet. "I thought you'd have been nepto, Sinjinkin, and it's not the point." She snapped. "Do you realize what you've done? You've humiliated us." "Oh, I realize," I said softly. That was rather the idea. The line went silent for a moment before. She hissed, "You've made an enemy of this family." I smiled. "Funny. I thought you already made me one." Within days, the fallout began. The local paper ran a story on my donation, calling it a stunning gesture of generosity. Photographs of my Christmas card circulated online, shared gleefully by those who despise the Foundation's elitism. And at the Heritage Foundation's holiday gala, my cousin William was overheard muttering about betrayal, his face crimson with fury. But I was no longer concerned with their outrage. I had written myself back into the story they tried to erase me from, and I had done it in a way they could never ignore. For once, the mantle was mine and every glittering card bore only my name. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, I couldn't deny the flicker of something else, anticipation. Because I knew this was only the beginning. They didn't just seethe in silence, they mobilized. By New Year's, I began hearing whispers from acquaintances who had attended the Heritage Foundation's Winter Gala. Apparently, my name had been on more lips than champagne. She torpedoed us. Someone had muttered within earshot of a reporter. "Ungrateful," another hissed, "after all we did for her," as though a few obligatory dinners and half-hearted toasts had bought my loyalty forever. One evening, while I was finishing a glass of wine by the fire, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was William himself. His voice came through low, measured, yet trembling with suppressed rage. "You've caused a lot of damage, you know," he said. "Damage," I repeated lightly. "I'd call it balance. You and your friends preserve buildings. I help build homes." "Seems fair. You don't understand how these things work," he snapped. "Our donors are pulling back. They think you're..." "Stunt means we're losing relevance. Do you realize what this could cost us?" Première lunette back smacked the ceiling. "Yes, that's exactly the point." There was a pause, then his tone shifted, darker. "You think you've won. But you've only declared war. Then let the war begin," I said, and ended the call. The very next week, invitations began pouring in from people who had once barely acknowledged me. The mayor's office sent a handwritten note thanking me for supporting meaningful change. A well-known businesswoman asked me to speak at her New Year's luncheon. Even the trust, who'd initially been stunned, was now eager to showcase me as their champion. At the luncheon, I stood at a podium in front of a sea of polished faces. Cameras flashed, forks clinked against porcelain. I wore a crimson dress that caught the light with every movement. This season, I learned that family is not defined by blood, nor by glossy photos on a mantle. Family is defined by who stands with you, who believes in what you believe, and who refuses to erase you. Polite applause swelled into cheers, and I saw Michael, the Trust's director, beaming from his seat. But not everyone was smiling. Near the back of the room, I caught sight of Margaret. She was rigid, her hands clenched around her clutch. Her eyes locked onto mine with a promise. This wasn't over. Later that night, I received another message. phone account. Attached was a document pages of accusations meant to discredit me. Claims that I had mismanaged money, that I had ulterior motives, that my donation was nothing but a tax dodge. I laughed, though ennies flickered in my chest. Who else but my family would sink this low? The next day, the rumors hit social media. Is the Urban Renewal Trust laundering donations? Why would someone drop $2 million unless there was a hidden agenda? Michael called me in a panic. We know it isn't true, but people are asking questions. Do you want to respond? Not yet. I told him. Let them spin their stories. I've got one of my own to tell. That night, I stayed up drafting a speech for the Trust's upcoming press conference. If my family wanted war, they would get war, but on my terms. No whispers, no shadows. I would walk straight into the fire, with my head high. As I wrote, my mind wandered to memories I had long buried. The way my mother once told me, You'll never belong if you keep speaking out. The way Margaret had laughed when I suggested we donate instead of buying another vacation home. The way William had clapped my shoulder at a party, whispering, "You're too soft-hearted for this family." And now, here we were. The softness they mocked had become the sharpest blade in my hand. The night before the press conference, I poured myself another glass of wine and lit the tree one final time. The ornaments glittered in silence, each one a reminder of years I had poured into a family who had chosen to forget me. "Well," I said aloud, raising my glass to the empty room, "here's to being unforgettable." The next morning, the cameras would turn my way. And I knew once I stepped onto that stage, there would be no going back. The conference hall smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint, the kind of place where nervous energy clung to the walls. Rows of chairs stretched to the back, everyone, filled journalists, donors, local politicians, even a few curious onlookers. The cameras were already humming, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Michael gave me a reassuring nod from the wings. "They'll try to trap you," he whispered. "Stay calm. Stay true." I adjusted the pearl clasp at my neck and stepped forward. A ripple moved through the crowd. Flashes popped like fireworks as I approached the podium. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady, though my pulse hammered in my throat. "I know there have been rumors about me, about the trust, about motives. So let's set the record straight." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting them hang on the thread of my next words. "I gave $2 million because I could. Because I believe in the work this organization is doing. Because families should not freeze in the winter while historic mansions sit empty. Because children deserve homes, not excuses." A murmur of agreement rolled through the hall. I saw a reporter lean forward, scribbling furiously. "And yes," I continued, allowing a smile to curl at the corner of my mouth, "it's true that my family did not approve. They would rather cling to the past than build for the future. They would rather exclude and erase than embrace and uplift. And if they are angry at me, I say let them be angry." Someone in the crowd shouted, "What about the tax dodge?" I leaned closer to the microphone. "Do you think I need smoke and mirrors to justify generosity? My finances are open. The trust books are open. Transparency isn't a threat to me, it's a strength." Applause broke out, loud, insistent, drowning out the heckler. I spotted Margaret at the back again, her face tight as stone, her lips pressed into a razor-thin line. She stormed out before I even finished. By the time the conference ended, my words were already trending online. "She silences critics with fire and grace," one headline read. Another, "2 million and no regrets, but success is never without consequence." That evening, a black SUV idled outside my house longer than any vehicle had reason to. When I peeked through the curtains, I could see only the vague outline of figures in the front seat, watching. When I stepped onto the porch, the SUV peeled away without headlights. The next morning, Michael called again. His voice was tight. "We've received threats, emails, calls. Some donors are nervous from the foundation." I asked, though we both knew the answer. "Anonymous," he said carefully. "But the timing is no coincidence." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then we doled down on Sud-West Widede. The trust launched a housing project that spring, fast-tracked by my donation. Bulldozers moved in, breaking ground where dilapidated warehouses once stood. Local families cheered. Cameras documented it all. But behind the celebrations, my phone buzzed with venom. "You'll regret this. Traitor. Blood runs thicker than money." Each message stung, but none broke me. Because beneath the anger, there was fear, and fear meant I was winning. One night, over dinner with Michael, he leaned in and said quietly, "You realize they won't stop, don't you? The foundation, your family, they'll fight until they break you." I sipped my wine and smiled. "Then they'll have to try harder." Because I'm just getting started. As spring blossomed into summer, I began planning something even bigger. A gala, not for the foundation, but for the trust, a mirror of their annual event, but brighter, bolder, louder. Invitations already drafted, lists already made. If they wanted war, they were about to learn how ruthless I could be when I fought not with bitterness but with generosity. And in the shadows of my resolve, a new thought flickered. What if this wasn't just about revenge anymore? What if this was the beginning of a legacy they could never erase? I sent the gala invitations with the same deliberate calm I used to sprinkle sugar on holiday cookies, each one measured, sweet, and with a little sting tucked beneath the ribbon. The venue was a refurbished textile mill, its arched windows now glittering with chandeliers. We called it the Renewal Ball, and the invitations read like a dare. Join us to celebrate homes for every family. Prominent names accepted immediately. Others hesitated, and then, one by one, backed into the guest list like reluctant actors on a stage where I was already center. The night of the gala, the mill thrummed with life. Musicians tuned, waiters adjusted collars, and volunteers made last-minute checks on a display of photos, families in front of new, modest homes, laughter caught mid-burst. Michael introduced me as a patron who believes in the future, and the audience rose with applause that felt like a long, collective exhale. I stood at the edge, glacinant watch under the Eames speech, murmured a board member, nudging me. We'd love to hear from you. I walked to the podium while a hush settled. The microphone caught my breath and made it small and audible. We once believed that preserving the past meant preserving people, I said. But what good is a mansion if the people who tend the gardens have nowhere to sleep? A woman at the front, her eyes rimmed red from emotion, stood and clapped until her palms stung. I felt the room shift, gratitude, curiosity, and a trace of something else, envy. Not from those who had been uplifted, but from those who felt their authority challenged. Later, at the fundraiser's after-party, Margaret stood with a group that had once been our circle. She sipped a drink and watched me, as if observing an exhibit. When I approached, she flinched, then smiled with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed anger into civility. "You're making a spectacle of generosity," she said, in the brittle voice of someone with too many expectations. "Is this about the people, or about you?" "It's about changing lives," I answered. "If the spectacle helps, I'll wear it. But the point remains, more homes, fewer excuses." She narrowed her eyes. "You don't get to teach us morality." "I'm not teaching," I said. "I'm acting." That night, back at home, a message arrived that changed the tenor of the struggle. An envelope, unmarked, slipped under my door. Inside were photographs, my childhood me, small and earnest, handing out sandwiches at a church drive. Me at graduation, Capescu. Emmy, older, opening a shelter with a ribbon-cutting smile. Someone had culled my life like a dossier. On the last page, a single line of type. "We remember everything." I carried those photos like a stone in my pocket for days. The implication was clear. They could reach into my past, into the boxes I thought were private. I began to understand that the fight would not be won by celebrities' speeches or ribbon cuttings alone. They could weaponize history. So I started to prepare for that. I opened the drawers of my life and took stock. I reached out to the people I had helped quietly, for years single mothers. Retired teachers, a mechanic whose hands still trembled from years of toyland, asked if they would stand with me publicly. I offered them small tokens, a year's rent, tuition for a child, legal help. I told them the truth. If they dig into me, they'll find the work. I need you to tell that story. They listened because they owed nothing to my family and everything to the roofs that sheltered their children. Their voices, soft at first, became a counterweight to the smear campaigns. Short-term when it appeared in interview, in social media posts. She helped me when the bank wouldn't. She found a place for my boy. She showed up. The narrative began to twist. The more my family tried to vilify me, the more visible the people I helped became. But the personal attacks escalated. An anonymous blog published claims that the trust development plans would gentrify neighborhoods, displacing the very people I intended to help. A conservative talk show played clips of my speeches out of context, and a donor withdrew a significant pledge. Citing controversy, someone smeared graffiti across the building site, "Traitor," in thick black letters. William called one evening, voice blunt. "Do you hear what's happening to us?" Our donors are nervous. "Yes, but there's more." The board is mobilizing to cut ties. They say your style is reckless. They say you have to be contained. "You won't contain me," I said without hesitation. "You may not be able to stop this," he warned. "And if their reputations fall because of you, they'll dig deeper." That was the moment I realized that the next battle would be legal as much as reputational. I hired a lawyer retainer, signed with no smug sense of victory, only the sober knowledge that caution buys time. Papers were filed, defamation counters, public statements. A transparency report for the trust that laid our books bare, like open palms. We held town hall, meetings where families came and stood at podiums to tell their stories. We invited journalists to walk building sites, to meet the carpenters and social workers. One reporter, a young woman named Priya, dug in and asked the questions that mattered. Who benefits? She asked, pointing toward a planning map as though the papers on the table were terrains of war. Who stands to be displaced? We prioritize existing residents, Michael answered. We work with housing authorities to secure placements. We're building affordable units, not luxury condos. Priya scribbled, skeptical but fair. Her piece ran balanced, and its reach pricked holes in the smear. It didn't stop the graffiti or the withdrawn donations, but it steadied the narrative. As the months rolled, tensions within, my family grew taut until a thread snapped. An old trustee of the foundation, one with influence and a habit of making quiet threats into immediate consequences, surfaced with allegations that predated the Christmas card claims of financial impropriety from a decade earlier. The media devoured the possibility of scandal with ravenous appetite. I sat across from my lawyer, who advised restraint, and I felt the familiar itch for fury rise in my chest. Don't feed them, he cautioned. Let the evidence speak. But my sister leaked something worse, a private email I had written years ago, full of frailties and confessions, published with a mocking headline. My neighbors called to ask if I was all right. A radio host replayed my words in a sardonic tone. For the first time since the cards, I felt unmoored. I thought of the envelope of childhood, photos and the single line we remember, everything, and understood how memory can be used like a blade. At night, I dreamed of mantles lined with cards. In one dream, my family's glossy photos burned, and the firelight revealed the faces of the people I had helped, standing where the portraits once were. I woke with a plan. If they would weaponize my past, I would open it on my terms. I arranged a luncheon in a small community center and asked Priya to attend. I invited the people who had been helped, the volunteers, the contractors, anyone who could testify to the tangible change. Then I called a handful of the more reasonable members of my family and invited them too, not to argue, but to witness. When the luncheon day came, the room hummed with a quiet electricity. Plates were passed, children played at the back, and I stood to speak without notes. You want to know who I am? I asked. Here are the receipts. I told stories about a woman I helped find a job after she'd been turned away for her age. About a family that moved into a tiny house they could finally call their own. About a teacher who could afford to repair her roof. I spoke plainly about my motives, about why preserving mansions without people inside felt hollow to me. Margaret arrived late and sat with her arms folded. William watched with a face like carved wood. When I finished, I invited anyone who had a question to step forward. Hands raised, some to ask about funding details, others to ask why I would make enemies of my kin. A woman named Rosa, whom I had helped rehome, stood and spoke in a voice that trembled and then steadied. She didn't just give us money, Rosa said. She gave us leap now. He learns. Applause rose like a wave, and for a moment the room felt like the future I wanted to build vocal, tangible, undeniable. Margaret's jaw tightened, but she did not stand. William sat very still, his hand folded over his knee. That night, after the crowd dispersed, William approached me alone, in the dim hallway. You think you've won hearts, he said quietly. But you've also burned bridges. Not all bridges are worth crossing, I replied. Some keep people trapped. He looked at me, as if trying to measure me anew. You have a way of making enemies into martyrs, he said. Be careful whom you inspire. I will inspire who needs it, I said. If that makes enemies, then let it be so. The war had changed. It was no longer simply a duel between family and me. It was a fight over definitions of community, of legacy, of who had the right to decide who belonged. And somewhere beneath the noise, a quieter goal had taken root in me, to make sure that when history wrote itself, it would not forget the people who needed roofs over their heads more than plaques on their walls. Autumn settled in with a kind of brittle sharpness, the air crisp and leaves rattling down like applause that had soured. By then, the renewal ball's afterglow had faded, and the war had become a constant hum in my veins. Every headline felt like a battlefield report. One morning, while sipping coffee by the window, I saw an article slide across my phone. Asterisk Heritage Foundation accuses rival donor of manipulation. Asterisk my photo was plastered beneath the title, a still from the gala, where I'd been caught mid-laugh. They'd spun my joy into something sinister. The article quoted William, though he never named me directly. Asterisk when giving becomes about ego rather than impact, the cause suffers. Real philanthropy doesn't wear sequins. Asterisk sequins. I had worn a dress with beaded shoulders, sparkling under the lights. They were mocking the shimmer, not the substance. I laughed bitterly. So this is what they've been reduced to. I muttered aloud. That afternoon, Michael called, his voice low. We've had to more donors pull out. One cited bad press. Another said they couldn't be part of a war zone. Then we need to show them it isn't a war zone, I said. We need something undeniable, something no smear can erase. He hesitated. Like what? Like building faster, bigger, making the change so visible they choke on it. So pushed. Crews worked through dusk, floodlights illuminating rising frames of new houses. Volunteers painted, hauled, and laid bricks with a ferocity that felt almost revolutionary. Every week, another family moved in. And every week, the foundation scrambled to counter, announcing new preservation projects that sounded smaller and smaller in comparison. Still, the knives kept coming. Margaret sent a letter to the editor, elegantly phrased, accusing me of turning sacred traditions into social experiments. She signed it not as my sister, but as asterisk Margaret Davenport, heritage trustee. Asterisk the omission of kinship cut sharper than the words themselves. I responded not with another speech, but with an open house. The first completed, homes opened their doors to the public. Children ran through hallways, showing off bedrooms barely bigger than closets, but there's. Reporters wandered, cameras capturing chipped smiles and tiny windows strung with dollar store curtains. One photo made the front page, a boy, maybe 7, grinning with 2 missing teeth, standing in front of a bed with blue sheets. The headline read, asterisk gift of shelter, gift of dignity, asterisk. For the first time, the narrative swung hard in our favor. And yet, behind closed doors, the family's anger calcified. At Thanksgiving, when most households were setting tables, I received a package. Inside was a single holiday card, the family's new one, glossy and smug. Everyone was there, dressed in crimson and gold. Azerbaijan in embossed iri asterisk from all of dasterisk all of us. I held it in my hand for a long moment, then set it in the fireplace. The flames licked at their smiles, curling the edges until their perfect faces blackened. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I drafted my next move. A second renewal ball, this one set for Christmas Eve, the very night my family would be toasting themselves. Invitations promised not only celebration, but a reveal. The unveiling of a permanent scholarship fund for children from the new homes. When Michael read the draft, he whistled. You're going for their throats. No, I said, my voice cool. I'm going for their legacy. By the time their grandchildren ask who shaped this city, it won't be their names written in the margins. It'll be mine. The night of the Christmas Eve gala arrived with snow falling in fat, silent flakes. The mill glowed again, candles flickering along every table, garlands strung with care. Guests poured in, politicians, business leaders, families from the new houses, reporters eager for another headline. I took the stage in a deep emerald gown, the color of pine and permanence. My speech was short, but sharp. Last year, I was erased from a Christmas card. This year, I write my own page in the story of this city. Tonight, I announce the Davenport Renewal Scholarship Fund $1 million reserved for the children of our new homes. So their futures will not be erased as mine was. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the mill's steel beams. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. A few even wept. But in the back, just beyond the halo of light, I saw them, Margaret, William, and 3 other trustees. Their faces were pale, rigid, as if carved from ice. They hadn't been invited, but of course they had come to witness, to seethe. And in that moment, as the cheers roared, I realized this wasn't just victory. This was immortality. I stepped down from the stage, glass raised, and thought, asterisk Merry Christmas, indeed, asterisk. Snow still clung to the streets long after the gala lights dimmed, but the city hummed differently now. People spoke of the renewal, funded coffee shops, in barber chairs, in the long lines at the market. The children, who would one day wear caps and gowns with scholarships in their names, had become a symbol. My name was spoken with it. Davenport, the one who broke away, the one who gave. But victory is a brittle crown. It cracks if worn carelessly. 2 days after Christmas, Michael arrived at my house, his scarf dusted with frost. He closed the door behind him with unusual care, as though afraid of breaking something fragile. There's talk of a lawsuit, he said quietly. I frowned. On what grounds? Defamation. Misrepresentation. They're accusing you of slandering the Foundation's mission in your speeches. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Since when is telling the truth slander? Since power feels cornered, he replied. I paced, firelight licking at the walls. Let them sue. The courtroom is another stage. I'll bring every family we've housed, every child we've helped. Courtrooms don't run on morality, he reminded me gently. They run on procedure. That night, I reread the envelope of childhood photos. Asterisk, we remember everything. Asterisk, the words took on new weight. They weren't just watching. They were collecting, preparing to turn my life into a weapon. By New Year's, their first strike landed. A prominent newspaper ran an expose, seeing the woman who gave millions, but at what cost? Asterisk, they dug into my finances, dragging every investment into the light, twisting routine transactions into sinister shadows. They printed old quarrels with business partners, painting me as volatile, untrustworthy. I read the article at dawn, hands trembling around my mug. By mid-morning, neighbors were whispering, some sympathetic, others wary. Margaret called that evening. For once, her voice wasn't sharp, but smooth, almost tender. You can end this, she said. Withdraw. Stop the speeches. Let the trust carry on without you. If you do, the stories will stop. I could almost see her face, serene, certain she'd given me a lifeline. No, I whispered. This isn't about me anymore. This is about every family who needed what we built. Her tone hardened. Then don't say I didn't warn you. Weak bus escalated. The lawsuit was filed, heavy with accusations, but I responded with receipts. We held open audits. We invited watchdogs to comb through every dollar. And in the process, something shifted. The more they attacked, the more people rallied. One night, at a televised debate on housing policy, a reporter asked me bluntly, "Aren't you just weaponizing generosity against your own family?" I leaned forward, every word deliberate. If generosity is a weapon, then ask yourself, why are they so afraid of it? The clip went viral. Overnight, the public narrative flipped again. Hashtags bloomed. Strangers sent letters of support. A child mailed me a drawing of his new house with crooked windows and the words, asterisk, thank you, asterisk, and still. The family circled, their pride bleeding into desperation. The Heritage Foundation's winter fundraiser that year was a hollow spectacle. Fotoliken half-empty miles. One columnist wrote, asterisk, it seems preservation doesn't preserve donors. Asterisk, the following week, William appeared at my doorstep. No entourage, no SUV idling nearby, just him, shoulders hunched against the wind. May I come in? He asked. I studied him for a moment before opening the door. By the fire, he looked older, worn. He turned the glass of water I'd given him in slow circles. You've won, he admitted softly. But you don't understand what you've destroyed. I understand perfectly, I said. He shook his head. You've divided us beyond repair. Our name will never mean what it once did, then build a new meaning. I countered. He looked at me long, something like grief in his eyes. You've traded family for legacy. No, I replied, steady as stone. I traded illusion for impact. They chose to erase me. I chose to become unforgettable. He left without another word, snow crunching under his shoes. In the months that followed, the lawsuit fizzled, the foundation shrank, and the trust flourished. New homes rose. Scholarships rolled out. My name once whispered in derision, became tied to concrete, wood, and children's laughter. And yet, in quiet hours, I sometimes stared at the empty mantel in my home, the place where a family card might once have sat. It was bare still, but not cold. Instead, it waited for the next card I'd design, myself. Not of glossy smiles, but of futures built, strong enough to last. Because in the end, I learned this, the truest Christmas card isn't a picture of who you stand beside. It's the legacy you leave behind, written in lives no one can erase. Spring came soft and deceptive, the kind of season that looks gentle on the surface but hides storms under its thaw. The houses we built were filling with families' now children's chalk drawings on sidewalks. Laundry fluttering on new lines, laughter carrying down streets that had once been silent. I should have felt finished, victorious. But victory, I learned, doesn't end a war. It changes its shape. The Heritage Foundation was collapsing, but it wasn't crumbling quietly. They rebranded. Overnight, glossy ads appeared across the city with a new, named the Davenport Legacy Project. They had taken our family name, stripped it of its history, and slapped it onto brochures promising renewal through tradition. Margaret was front and center in every photo. We will not allow reckless generosity to rewrite who we are, she declared in a video that spread faster than any of our press releases. The Davenport legacy is not chaos. It is order. It is dignity. It is continuity. For a moment, I froze. Seeing my name, wielded like a sword against me, stirred something deeper than anger. It was theft. Not of money, not of property, but of meaning. I slammed the video shut and called Michael. They've hijacked our name. They think they can bury me with it, he sighed. Already weary? We could sue for trademark infringement, but they'll spin it as you trying to silence them. It'll look ugly. Let it look ugly, I snapped. They've crossed into my territory, but even as the lawyer in me wanted to fight with contracts, the strategist in me knew better. This wasn't about legalities. It was about hearts, about who people believed carried the truth of that name. So I made a decision. If they wanted to claim Davenport as a brand, I would make Davenport into a story. We began producing short films, not commercials, but raw portraits. Rosa, the mother whose son now slept peacefully, sat in her tiny kitchen and said, "When I think Davenport, I think of a chance to breathe again." A teacher smiled through tears as she stood beneath a patched roof. Davenport means hope held up with two hands. We plastered the city with those faces, those words. Not models in suits, not Margaret in pearls, real people. Flawed, shining. And slowly, the tide shifted again. But the foundation wasn't done. One evening, as twilight bruised the horizon, I received a summons not for defamation this time, but for an inquiry into my personal taxes. Anonymous complaints had triggered an audit. It was meticulous, invasive, and timed perfectly to be coincidence. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. Asterisk, we remember everything. Asterisk for weeks. Auditors combed through every receipt, every transfer, every charitable deduction. My lawyer assured me I had nothing to fear, but the process was designed not to prove guilt, it was designed to exhaust. I barely slept. The nights were filled with restless pacing, the days with endless questions from strangers rifling through my life. And still, the work continued. Houses rose, scholarships rolled out, volunteers hammered and painted. I refused to let the shadow slow us. Then, one afternoon, the audit closed. Asterisk, no evidence of wrongdoing. Asterisk, 3 words, simple and devastating not to me, but to them. The news spread like wildfire. Editorials mocked the foundation for wasting resources chasing ghosts. My supporters grew louder, bolder. A columnist wrote, asterisk, every attempt to destroy her only proves her integrity. Asterisk, that night, I stood in front of the fireplace again, the mantle still bare. But this time, I didn't feel the emptiness as loss. I felt it as possibility. I thought, perhaps some mantles are not meant for family photos. Perhaps some are meant for trophies of resilience, invisible but heavy. Still, I knew it wasn't over. My family had lost the battle for reputation, but their hunger was deeper than appearances. They wanted to own the story, to dictate how history remembered us. And I wanted the opposite, to prove that history belongs not to the keepers of tradition, but to those who dare to rewrite it. As summer crept close, Michael asked me a question I hadn't considered. You've made your point. You've built homes, funded scholarships, outlasted their attacks. What now? What's the endgame? I looked out the window at the city skyline, cranes rising beside steeples, and answered slowly, the endgame isn't me. It's them, the children, the families. The endgame is a world where the name Davenport means they can stand without me, but deep inside. Another thought whispered, or maybe, just maybe, the endgame is immortality. And I wasn't sure yet which one would win. Bimid saw me, the sitting long, my name was there with city. The renewal, neighbourhoods had grown into something undeniable, blocks of modest houses with tidy porches. Gardens sprouting where weeds once reigned, murals painted by local artists declaring asterisk, we are still here asterisk. The air buzzed with a kind of pride that couldn't be bought. Yet pride has a way of drawing enemies like moths to flame. One evening, Michael rushed into my office, face pale. He dropped a folder on my desk, its edges frayed from being carried too fast. They're going after the trust now, he said. I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of anonymous complaints filed with City Council, claims that the trust was cutting corners, that our contractors were unsafe, that funds were being misused. Lies, everyone but wrapped in enough official language to force investigations. They want to suffocate us in bureaucracy, I murmured. Michael nodded grimly. If this sticks, construction halts. Families waiting for homes will be stuck in limbo. And they'll blame you. I closed the folder with deliberate calm. Then we fight not in the courts, not in the papers. We fight on the ground. The next morning, I was on site at the largest housing project. Hard hat on, standing shoulder to shoulder with the builders. Reporters caught me hauling lumber, wiping sweat from my brow. The image spread like wildfire, not the reckless socialite they painted me as, but a woman in steel-toed boots, sleeves rolled up, building alongside the very people she funded. Within days, families waiting for homes came to volunteer too. Teachers, shopkeepers, even teenagers showed up after school. The site became impossible to attack without attacking the people themselves. But still, my family pressed harder. Margaret launched a full campaign under their new Davenport legacy project. Billboards appeared with sepia-toned images of old estates, their slogans dripping with accusation. Asterisk true legacy protects. Asterisk asterisk tradition, not turmoil. Asterisk at a city council meeting. She stood before the microphone in pearls and calm fury. My sister believes legacy is about noise, she declared. But we know it is about stewardship. About respect. About preserving what was built by those before us. Her words landed with a polished sting. And for the first time in months, I felt the room lean toward her, hungry for stability after so much upheaval. That night, as rain pattered against my windows, doubt crept in. Was I really rewriting legacy or just burning bridges while trying? I poured a glass of wine and sat in the dark, staring at the bare mantel once more. For the first time in years, I whispered aloud, what if they're right? The silence answered back with a memory. Rose's son, holding his crook drawing of their new home. His gap-toothed smile cut through the doubt like a blade. No, they weren't right. They never had been. The next morning, I called Priya, the reporter who had always asked the harder questions. You want a story? I asked her. Come with me. See everything. The books, the projects, the families. Write what you find even if it damns me. She hesitated. Are you sure? If there's anything. There isn't, I said. Let the truth speak louder than slogans. For weeks, she shadowed us. She interviewed contractors, combed through our finances, ate dinner with families in the new neighborhoods. She saw the arguments too, the fights over budgets, the setbacks, the walls that needed rebuilding. And when her piece came out, it wasn't glossy. It was raw. Asterisk the Davenport divide. Preservation versus progress. Asterisk. But the subtitle struck hardest. Asterisk 1. Family chose history. One woman chose people. The city must decide which legacy to keep. Asterisk the article spread like wildfire, not because it was flattering, but because it was real. It forced the city to look at itself in the mirror. And, for the first time, Margaret called me not with fury, but with silence. She didn't speak when I answered, just breathed. Then, softly, she said, "You've made yourself unforgettable. But don't think for a second that means you've won." Then she hung up. I set the phone down, my reflection caught in the darkened window. For the first time, I wondered, perhaps winning and being unforgettable weren't the same thing at all. And perhaps I was no longer sure which one I wanted more. Autumn arrived, like an uninvited guest, brisk and insistent, rattling the renewal, neighborhoods with winds that carried whispers of both triumph and unease. Children walked to school under trees newly planted by volunteers, their roots tentative but determined. Each home stood as a rebuttal to my family's glossy photo cards, and yet I felt the shadow of their campaign stretching longer by the day. One evening, Michael came to me with a flyer he'd pulled off a lamppost downtown. The paper was thick, the ink expensive. Asterisk, asterisk, the Davenport Legacy Ball, asterisk, 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 preserve, protect, prosper, asterisk, the event was scheduled for December. 23 de tonight, Christmas Eve. Their timing were liberate. A mirror to our renewal ball, daring the city to choose which Davenport story to toast. They're doubling down, Michael said, tossing the flyer onto my desk. And they've secured it on banked. Family, even the governor's office. I stared at the flyer until the letters blurred. For years, I had been the invisible one, left off a Christmas card. Now they were fighting me with spotlights and champagne flutes, trying to erase me by overwhelming the stage. Then we won't just respond, I said finally. We'll redefine. We began planning a counter-gala, not in a mill this time, but under the open sky. The renewal, neighborhoods would host it themselves. No chandeliers, no string quartets. Instead, long tables in the streets, strung with lanterns, food cooked by the very families who had moved in, music from local bands. We called it asterisk, asterisk, the People's Feast, asterisk, asterisk. When word spread, something extraordinary happened. Donations poured in not from corporations, but from teachers, shopkeepers, bus drivers. One woman slipped an envelope of crumpled bills into our office Dropbox, scrawled with a note, asterisk, I don't have much. But I believe in you. Asterisk still, I knew the foundation would strike first. On the weeks before their ball, they released a polished video ad. Margaret stood on the steps of an ancestral estate, her voice smooth, rehearsed. Legacy isn't built in a day. It isn't loud. It is patient. It is dignified. It is Davenport. Clips followed archival, footage of old mansions, gala dances, ribbon cuttings from decades past. The final line landed like a dagger. Don't mistake noise for history. The city buzzed. Some admired the elegance. Others called it hollow, and I felt the sting of recognition. They were fighting, not just for control of the narrative, but for the right to define asterisk me. Asterisk Priya called the next morning. You've seen the ad? Yes, you know they're daring you to answer. I exhaled slowly, and I will. But not with another speech. December arrived cold and sharp. The night of the Legacy Ball, photographs flooded, social media, Margaret in diamonds. William shaking hands with the governor, champagne flutes raised beneath chandeliers dripping with crystal. The captions gushed about tradition, elegance, continuity. But the very next night, the city saw something else. Lanterns lit up the renewal, neighborhood streets, flickering against brick walls painted with murals of families and hands clasped in unity. Tables grandos con pollo, shepherd's pie legged red bestu. Children darted between, chairs with sparklers, laughter ringing louder than any orchestra. When I took the makeshift stage, just a wooden crate I wore, no jewels, only a wool coat and a scarf knit by one of the mothers. My words were simple. Legacy isn't what you keep locked behind gates. It's what you give away, so others can thrive. The cheers rose like a storm, carrying through the streets. Reporters captured it, all the governor's pearls at one gala, children's sparklers at another. By Christmas morning, the images had collided in every feed, every headline. One picture went viral. Margaret S. Bull, in glittering contrast with a renewal, child holding a plate of steaming food, smiling at the camera, lanterns glowing behind her. The caption, someone added read, asterisk which Davenport do you believe in? Asterisk, for the first time, my family didn't respond. Silence replaced their sharp rebuttals. No nuad. No letters to editors, just stillness. I stood by my fireplace that night, staring at the bare mantel. Slowly, I reached for the box I'd kept tucked away. Inside were a handful of old Christmas cards, the glossy ones, the staged smiles. I laid them a trophies, no aswand, but as relique. Ten première place very center. A child's crooked drawing I had been sent weeks earlier. A house, smoke curling from the chimney. Witzuwa asterisk, thank you, Davenport. Asterisk, the mantle, was no longer bare. And, for the first time in years, I felt not erased, not vengeful, but whole. Yet deep inside, I knew legacies don't end. They only evolve. And the next chapter, whether written in glittering ballrooms or on streets strung with lanterns, was still waiting to be fought for. Years passed, but the echoes of that December never fully faded. The legacy ball became a memory retold in society pages with a touch of wistfulness, while the People's Feast transformed into a tradition. Every year, on Christmas Eve, the renewal neighborhoods lit their lanterns, spread their tables, and welcomed anyone who arrived hungry. What against a grill? Beget armor bigger than the feud. But history has a way of settling its debt slowly. A decade later, I stood in the crowd at one of those feasts, not on stage, not giving speeches, but as a guest among many. Children who had once run with sparklers were now teenagers serving food, their scholarships carrying them to colleges my family never would have funded. Parents greeted me with hugs, their wrinkles deeper, their pride stronger. Some of the homes had new coats of paint, others had porches rebuilt after storms. They were alive. Mrs. Davenport. A boy called, waving me over. He was tall now, his voice nearly a man's. But I recognized him instantly, Rose's son, the one who had once mailed me a crooked drawing. He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket, grinning. Look, I kept it all these years. He handed me the same drawing. Edges frayed, colors faded, but still bright, the little house with smoke curling from the chimney. On the asterisk, think Davenport. Asterisk, I felt, my throat tighten. You're supposed to be thanking yourself now, I said softly. He shook his head. We wouldn't be here without you. I wanted to tell him the truth, that none of it had ever been about me alone. That it had been built on the backs of thousands, on sweat and belief. But I also knew legacy isn't just truth. Itegate story. And stories live because someone chooses to keep them alive. Meanwhile, the Heritage Foundation, my family's pride, had dwindled into a footnote. Their estates, once pristine, had become used and benefactors. Margaret still appeared at ribbon cuttings, her pearls shining, but fewer cameras showed up. William retired quietly to a countryside home. They weren't ruined, not exactly. Just irrelevant. One spring afternoon, years after we had last spoken, I received a letter in handwriting I recognized. Margaret, asterisk you've won. But I wonder if either of us truly did. The family is fractured. The foundation is a shell. Your name belongs to the streets, not the mansions. Perhaps that is legacy. Perhaps it is loss. Either way, history will decide. I read it once, twice, and tucked it into the same box where I had once kept their glossy cards. By then, I was older. My hair had silvered. My hands bore the map of years. I no longer sought to be unforgettable. I simply wanted to leave something worth remembering. At the next People's Feast, I stood in the background again, lantern light flickering across my face. A little girl pointing at Imadi. Who's that? She whispered. Her mother smiled down at her. That's Davenport. She made this possible. The girl's eyes widened, then she ran off to chase friends, not caring much about names or history. And that, I realized, was the truest victory, that the feast, the homes, the laughter existed so strongly they no longer needed me at all. Later that night, I returned home and lit a single candle on the mantel. Around it, I placed no family card, no glossy print. Just the drawing of the house, still crooked, still perfect. Legacy, I thought, isn't marble or pearls. It's a lantern lit in the dark, a child fed, a roof that holds through storms. And as the flame danced, steady and quiet, I knew that even if my name one day faded, the light would remain. Would you like me to carry the story one final stretch into the asterisk distant future asterisk, where the Davenport name is remembered in history books long after both galas and feasts are gone? Fifth to know like a page through a web. The city had changed so much that even I would have struggled to recognize it. Towers of glass stood where warehouses once crumbled. Whole districts bore murals that told their own histories. And the renewal, neighborhoods, those fragile seedlings I had once fought to plant, had grown into something permanent. By then, my family's estates had become curiosities. Tour buses wound up their long drives, guides pointing out chandeliers, marble staircases, and photographs of galas no one truly remembered. Children yawned at the tours, more interested in the gift shop than in the portraits of Davenports smiling stiffly under crystal chandeliers. The Heritage Foundation existed only as a plaque outside one of those estates, asterisk. Founded 1882, dissolved 2039, asterisk. But my name lived differently. In a dusty university library, a historian lectured to students. On the screen behind him glowed two words, asterisk asterisk the Davenport divide. Asterisk asterisk he explained it not as gossip, not as scandal, but as a turning point in civic history. Slides showed grainy photos the Legacy Bowl, all glitter and pearls, juxtaposed with the People's Feast, lanterns glowing over crowded tables. Which Davenport was history? He asked the class. A student raised her hand. Both. One preserved the past, the other built the future. But only one still lives in the city's bones. The professor nodded, advancing the slide. A mural filled the screen. A crooked house, smoke curling from the chimney, and beneath it the words asterisk, thank you Davenport. Asterisk, the mural, sprawled across a wall in the Renewal District, untouched by graffiti, repainted lovingly each time the colors faded. Meanwhile, in the neighborhoods themselves, the feast still happened. Lanterns were strung across streets that now bustled year-round. Homes repaired and repainted, porches sagging under the weight of grandchildren. No one called it Davenport's Feast anymore. It was simply the People's Feast. A child once asked, why do we light lanterns every year? Her grandmother smiled, dishing stew into her bowl. Because someone, a long time ago, lit the first one so we could see our way forward. Her name was Davenport. That's all you need to know. And so it went. My name faded from lips but not from lives. Not marble, statues, not pearls behind glass but children's drawings. Murals on brick, lanterns that burned against the dark. In time, the city itself renamed a district. Renewal became Davenport Square. Not for me as a person, but for what the word had come to mean. Generosity turned into permanence, defiance turned into shelter. And perhaps that was the truest immortality not being remembered, as asterisk me, asterisk, but as a story that could not be erased. Because one Christmas, I was left off a card. And a century later, the city itself became the card. Written in lights and laughter, addressed not to family, but to everyone who ever needed a place to belong. Centuries later, the city no longer resembled the one where my feud had begun. Towers pierced the sky, their spires glimmering like constellations tethered to earth. Skyways stretched between them, gardens floated on rooftops, and rivers once polluted now ran clear, lined with parks where families gathered in the evenings. Yet, in the Renewal District's no longer edges of the city. But its vibrant, hearth-the-lanterns still burned each Christmas Eve. Not paper anymore, but solar glass, glowing in every color, strung between steel and wood. Between balconies and trees. Children, now riding electric scooters instead of running barefoot. Still carried sparklers, their laughter unchanged across centuries. Historians had turned my story into curriculum. Hitoine Longer asked, Davenport Fear is the Davenport myth? Asterisk, they taught of two legacies. One of preservation and privilege, the other of renewal and people. Plays reenacted the split. Novels reimagined the rivalry in every genre romance, tragedy, even science fiction. Is of die non-musrasa flam the glass. Next to it, a recording of Margaret's speech at the Legacy Ball played on loop, her pearls catching the light of another era. Visitors stopped, listened, and then walked toward the mural installation. A crooked house. Sculling from its chimney, Widzoastris, thank you Davenportstris glowing in holographic paint. Some called me saint, some rebel, some opportunist. But time had blurred the edges of me into something larger. Tous the people that the premise, but that a promise had been erased. Not from family, no from home. In the Renewal Square of the future city, a tradition persisted. At the stroke of midnight each Christmas Eve, a child was chosen to light the first lantern. They knew little of the feud, little of Margaret or William, but they knew this, the lantern meant hope, belonging, light in the dark. One year, a little girl lit the lantern and turned to her father. Why do we still do this? Her father lifted her onto his shoulders and pointed to the skyline. Because long ago, someone refused to be forgotten. She lit a lantern when others tried to put it out. And every year, We remind ourselves never to let the light die. The girl smiled, lantern glow reflecting in her eyes. What was her name? He hesitated, then whispered as though reciting a prayer. Davenport, and in that moment, the name was no longer mine. It belonged to them, woven into centuries of tradition, immortal not in portraits or cards, but in light itself. Because was time, become le gens. A myth told in lanterns, laughter, and roofs that held against storms. And so, even when all who remembered me were dust, the city still carried my defiance in every glow. The Christmas card they once denied me had stretched across centuries, written not in ink, but in fire. 1,000 years had passed, and the city that once bore brick and mortar had become a living organism of steel, glass, and light. Its towers were not just buildings, but ecosystems, spiraling upward into clouds. Their roots sunk deep into ground that remembered centuries of struggle and triumph. The old names of neighborhoods had long since dissolved, replaced by zones and sectors. Yet one word still lingered on every tongue like a prayer. Asterisk, asterisk, Davenport, asterisk, asterisk, no one spoke it as a surname anymore. To most, Davenport was not a person, not even a family. Davenport was myth woven into the rhythm of life, half remembered as history, half told as legend. On the eve of the solstice festival, what Christmas had become lanterns still glowed. They no longer needed candles or wires. They were spheres of pure light, drawn from the city's own energy grid, hovering gently in the air. But the ritual remained. Children released them into the sky, and as they drifted upward, they carried whispers of hope. An elder told the story in the plaza, her voice strong and lilting, passing to crowd of why, Kildrin. Long ago, she began, there was one who was erased by her own blood. Left off the card, forgotten from the story. But instead of silence, she gave light. She built homes where there were none, tables where there was hunger. And she lit the first lantern, so no one would feel unseen again. Was she real? A boy asked, clutching his glowing lantern. The elder smiled. History says yes, legend says more. What matters is this. When you speak her name, you are not just remembering a woman. You are remembering a promise. Across the plaza, a mural shimmered projected by technology, but painted first by human hands, centuries earlier. The crooked house still stood, smoke curling from the chimney. And beneath it the words asterisk, thank you Davenport asterisk flickered in eternal light. Pilgrims came from distant places each year, not to worship, but to witness. They touched the mural as though it were holy, whispered their own names into the air, and asked not for miracles, but for belonging. Davenport had become less a figure and more a symbol, the guardian of the forgotten, the one who turned exile into immortality. Some sects of the future city even prayed to her, calling her asterisk the keeper of lanterns. Asterisk in their hymns, she was a goddess of light, a protector who walked among shadows to find those left behind. Yet in the archives of the great university, a dusty book still remained. Inside were the records, the speeches, the photographs, the proof of a woman, once flesh and blood. A historian, leafing through those pages, whispered as though speaking to a ghost. They will never know the sharpness of your spite or the depth of your grief. They will never know how revenge became generosity and generosity became eternity. But they will know your name, and perhaps that is all you ever needed on that solstice night. 1,000 lanterns rose into the sky, glowing brighter than the towers themselves. And if one looked closely enough through the haze of centuries, through the myths and songs and legends, one might see a single figure in the light, smiling at the city she had once dared to rewrite, not forgotten, not erased, forever Davenport. And so the centuries, like waves, carried my name into song. Not history books, not courts, not ledgers, but verses passed from lips to lips under lantern glow. Children learned them first, then taught them to their own, until the words became as much a part of the solstice festival as the feast itself. On the night when the city's towers dimmed and the lanterns rose, the people sang the asterisk asterisk ballad of Davenport. Asterisk asterisk, its melody was simple, almost childlike, but its weight was centuries deep. Asterisk, they left her name from the card that year, but still her light burned bright. She built a home where none could stand and turned the dark to light. Asterisk asterisk Davenport. Au qui peur tru. Lantern the sky guide the lost and lift the never let them. Asterisk. Inon plaza a girl whose father sang, who was father Kurdseli. Shuesked. He lifted her lantern into her hands, helping her hold it steady. Maybe she was a woman. Maybe she was more. All that matters is this: she made sure no one was forgotten. And now it's our turn. Together they released the lantern, and it drifted upward, one among thousands. High above the city, the night bloomed, with light floating stars. Rising prayers, promises etched not in marble, but in fire, and as the song faded, a hush fell over the crowd. For just a moment, in the silence between notes, they felt it, the presence of something larger. Older, woven into the very fabric of the city, not a woman, not a feud, not even a family name, a legend. Hamid. A light that no erasure could ever extinguish. Forever Davenport. And so the hymn grew, not a fragment, not a child's verse, but a sweeping epic that rose each solstice night, sung by thousands beneath a sky filled with floating lanterns. It was not written by poets or etched by scribes. It lived in voices, bending with time, reshaped by each generation, yet always carrying the same fire. The Kaledi Astic of Davtarisk. Asterisk, asterisk, the epic of Davenport, asterisk, 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 they struck her name from the winter card. Closed the circle. Barred the gate, but silence breeds a sharper song, and exile kindles fate. Asterisk 2. Asterisk, she gave not pearls, nor crystal halls, but roofs to shield the storm. She built with hands that others mocked, and gave the hearth its form. Asterisk, asterisk, O Davenport, the keeper's flame, the lantern in the sky. We call your name when nights grow long, and shadows dare to lie. Asterisk 4. Asterisk, her sisters draped in polished glass, their feasts of wine and gold, but she lit tables in the street, where every hand could hold. Asterisk V. Asterisk, and when they cursed, and when they sued, and when they sought her fall, she raised the poor to sing her song, and love outshone it all. Asterisk 6. Asterisk, O Davenport, the keeper's flame, the lantern in the sky. Your gift became the world's own heart. Your promise cannot die. The last verse always ended with silence as children released their lanterns into the air. Thousands of glowing orbs rose above the city, drifting higher until they were indistinguishable from the stars themselves. And in that silence, whether truth or imagination, many swore they felt it, a presence, a warmth, as if the very myth leaned down and whispered, asterisk, you are not forgotten. You never will be, asterisk, and thus the feud that began with a missing name on a Christmas card had become eternity. Sung not in anger, but in reverence. And so the centuries stretched into millennia, and the city that once held renewal districts became but one cradle among many. Humanity took to the stars not as conquerors, but as wanderers, carrying fragments of earthbound stories in their ships. Among those fragments, one name endured, asterisk, asterisk, Davenport, asterisk, asterisk. The crooked house, once sketched by a child, appeared carved into bulkhead walls. Painted on domes, etched in holographic murals. It became less a house than a symbol shelter carried into infinity. 1,000 light years from Earth, a captain of a generation, ship told the old tale to children born in orbit. She was forgotten by her own kin, the captain said, her voice steady over the hum of the life support systems. But she gave a light no one could erase. And we carry that light still, so that no child of the stars will ever be left without a home. One child raised her hand. Was Davenport real? The captain smiled. Just as elders once had on Earth, she was more than real. Some lanterns were carried outside into the void, their light sealed against vacuum, drifting freely until swallowed by the stars themselves. Over ages, Davenport's story outgrew its earthly roots. She was no longer remembered as a woman, nor as a family name. She became myth transfigured into archetype, the keeper of light, the guardian of the forgotten, the first builder. Some called her a saint, others a goddess. Or Terre simply asterisk the promised recent worlds where no trace of Earth's oceans or mountains remained. Where humanity's bloodline mingled with centuries of stars. One ritual persisted unchanged. On the longest night of the year whatever, that night was beneath alien, sun's children lifted lanterns, whispered the verses of the epic, and let the light rise. And far above, in the silence between stars, it was said that a presence lingered, still. Not a ghost, not a god, but something eternal. Davenport forever, a flame against forgetting, a lantern rising where darkness once ruled. From a single act of spite born, on a cold Christmas morning grew a legacy that eclipsed marble, pearls, and bloodlines. The family who once sought to erase her became a footnote. The card that excluded her dissolved into ash. But the lantern she lit born of defiance, carried by generosity rose higher than any grudge, brighter than any feud. In the end, Davenport's story was not about revenge at all. Davenport was forgotten once. She never was again.